seen Angela. So I'm wondering also what you think of the um, Salim as a narrator. I know that he's very loquacious. In fact, I think we can blame his need to detail every single event that's happened to him and his grandparents and his grandparents' friends and his grandparents' friends. It's just an insane amount of people that he's trying to cover and tell stories for. And I think that it's because of that the book itself is so long. I know that when I first started reading it, I didn't know what to make of this guy. I actually think as I kept reading it, I was kind of annoyed by the tone that he was taking with us as readers. And it just, and I think I'll talk about that in a moment, but I didn't know what to make of our narrator. And I think it was thankfully because of Padma's involvement. Padma is sort of, as Chelsea, I can't remember what, I think you called it the architect of a listener. I thought that was such a smart title because she is kind of her kind of presence in silence is actually really helpful in having letting me have patience with Salim and his really long descriptions, right? That's not to say that some of the things he describes are really beautiful, and I think that when he's not trying too hard and like he lets, because I think that's another piece, and I want to come back to that. But I think that when he lets like some of the true emotions of the family, or even the characters, like I really love Salim's mother, the way that he describes Amina, and sort of the complications and the tensions of her character, particularly the love story that she is sort of trapped in, right? Like the love that she has for this poet, but has this husband that she is trying to love as best she can by looking at all his details, right? Like, so some of that is really, I think those moments, like when he's really relating to paradoxes and contradictions that are just absolutely human, I actually really enjoy and really love. But there are other moments where I feel like he tries just way too hard, right? And, some of that relates to like how he's trying to consistently, it's almost like he's got like this chart, and maybe Rushdie, not necessarily Salim, Rushdie has this chart of, okay, so this incident, this very personal family incident in Salim's life equals this very specific historical moment, right? And he keeps doing that over and over again. And I feel like sometimes it's just a really, and I don't know much about Indian history, but I did look up some of this stuff and I'm like, okay, so that was a very purposeful sort of reconfiguration and microcosmic relation of what you're trying to relate a historical figure, and it just feels like it's really kind of forced sometimes, right? So I don't know. There are moments in the narration where I'm like, I think less is sometimes more, and I think he could definitely back off with some of the force. Um, the other thing I wanted to talk about was again that tone that he carries, because there's this sense of like self-deprecation every now and then, right? Where he kind of puts himself down, but the reason he puts himself down is because he's got such a big burden to be great, right? Or because he's got such a huge important role, right? And I don't know how that tension sits with me, like how we're supposed to feel pity for him, but how can you feel pitiful for someone who has telepathic powers that are just sort of carries this really strong demeanor. It's just I don't know. It's a weird contradiction that I'm trying to work out. And this made me think like, are we even supposed to like him? I mean, maybe Rushdie is specifically giving these qualities, so that way we're not necessarily supposed to be completely endeared to him, or even trust him for that matter, right? Like, I think Padma as a medium, or as like you're pointing out, Chelsea, in your own line of inquiry, Padma is sort of this guide, or perhaps even um, a reevaluation of what it means to be a listener. It becomes really important to understand, right? Maybe it's not the storyteller that's so important here, but who's listening that's more important, right? And so I almost like Padma a lot more than I do Salim, and the little bits that he gives her, right? So I'm just curious as to know what you all feel about the narrator, and so like the what do you think of his his attempts at trying to validate every single thing his really long descriptions, right? His that self-deprecation, but like really not self-deprecation, right? So what do you think of that? Also, what do you think of the Padma as a role, right? What is her significance in this story? I'm just really curious to know what you all think. I really want to like this book. Like every time I pick it up, I want to like it, but there's something that Salim says or does that just sort of is like, okay, I just don't know if I can carry on with the next chapter, right? But then there are other moments where I'm like, I've already read 4 chapters. That was really beautiful, right? So it's a really interesting roller coaster, and if anything, it helps highlight that Salim too has, if anything, a really human quality about him, even if he is sort of this godlike Ganesh, as he calls himself, figure. That he does. I think Rushdie is doing some dimensionalizing of his character, but it just might be interesting to hear what some of you are noticing and thinking.